We are often told that the timeline of human progress is a straight, ascending line, a slow climb from primitive caves to the heights of modern technology. Our history books claim that the cradle of civilization was born a mere 6,000 years ago in the dusty plains of Mesopotamia. But what if this narrative is not just incomplete, but a deliberate simplification? What if, before the first brick was laid in Uruk, a far more advanced, more ancient, and more terrifying power already claimed dominion over our planet? For decades, mainstream archaeology has brushed aside the most uncomfortable records left behind by the Sumerians, labeling their detailed chronicles as mere mythology. But the clay tablets do not speak in metaphors, they speak in numbers. They speak of kingships that lasted tens of thousands of years, and of gods who descended from the stars not to be worshipped, but to manage a global enterprise. We are standing at the edge of a forgotten abyss, looking back at a period that officially doesn't exist. Take, for instance, the Weld Blundell Prism. This artifact doesn't list reigns of decades, but of millennia. It describes 8 kings who ruled for a staggering 241,200 years before a great flood reorganized the surface of the earth. These are the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. To the modern mind, these figures are impossible, but to the ancients, they were a physical, historical reality. They were the architects of our biology, the masters of the me, the divine decrees that governed everything from technology to social order. Why would a civilization so advanced in mathematics and astronomy, capable of mapping planets we only rediscovered centuries later, suddenly decide to lie about their own origins? The truth is far more unsettling. They weren't the first, and we weren't the only ones here. We are the inheritors of a world that was already ancient before our ancestors even learned to light a fire. Today, we strip away the layers of academic censorship to examine the forbidden records that have been kept in the shadows. We will explore the lost chronicles of the Anunnaki, the genetic signatures left in our DNA, and the physical evidence of a global civilization that existed hundreds of thousands of years before our history began. This is not the story of a beginning. It is the story of a forgotten sequence of events that shaped the very core of who we are. Prepare to question everything you've been taught. You are about to enter a reality that was recorded in stone long before the dawn of man. Welcome to the world before civilization. To truly grasp the magnitude of the mystery we are about to unravel, we must first travel to the quiet halls of the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. There, shielded by glass and centuries of academic skepticism, sits a small, four-sided clay prism inscribed with the meticulous cuneiform script of the Sumerians. Known to scholars as the Weld Blundell Prism, this artifact is perhaps the most disruptive chronological document in human history. It is a record that does not merely suggest a different past, it demands one. This prism contains the Sumerian king list, a detailed political genealogy that begins not with nomadic tribes or primitive settlements, but with a startling declaration. After the kingship lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. This sentence alone shatters the conventional timeline of human progress. It implies that civilization was not a slow biological evolution of social structures, but a top down implementation, a gift, or an imposition from an external higher authority. But as we read further into the clay, the numbers begin to defy every law of human biology we know. It states that the first king, Alulim, ruled for 28,800 years. His successor, Alalangar, governed for 36,000 years. To the modern mind, these figures are absurd, the product of feverish mythology or symbolic exaggeration. But we must ask ourselves, why would a civilization as advanced as the Sumerians, a people who gave us the first laws, the first schools, and the first complex mathematics, suddenly lose their sense of reality when recording their own history? The Sumerian scribes were obsessed with bureaucratic precision. They tracked grain shipments, tax records, and planetary alignments with cold, calculating accuracy. Why would they treat their kingship records any differently? If we stop dismissing these numbers as poetic and start viewing them as data, a terrifying possibility emerges. We are not the first masters of this planet, and the beings who preceded us operated on a scale of time that makes a human lifetime look like a mere heartbeat. The key to unlocking the truth behind these impossible lifespans lies in the mathematical language the Sumerians used to record them. Unlike our modern base 10 system, the Sumerians utilized the sexagesimal system, base 60. This is the very same system we still use today to divide our hours into 60 minutes and our minutes into 60 seconds. It is the geometry of the circle, the 360 degrees of the horizon. When we look at the reigns of the antediluvian kings through this mathematical lens, we find a haunting consistency. Each reign is a perfect multiple of the Sar, a unit representing 3,600 years. The duration of their rule wasn't random. It was synchronized with celestial cycles that modern science is only beginning to understand. This suggests that the Anunnaki, those who came from heaven to earth, did not experience time as we do. Perhaps their biology was tied to a different planetary rhythm, or perhaps they possessed a technology so advanced it could arrest the very process of cellular decay. In the forbidden records, these kings are not described as gods in the spiritual sense, but as physical administrators. They were the architects of the me, the divine decrees or technological blueprints that governed every aspect of human existence, from weaving and metalworking to high-level governance and astronomy. If these records are literal, we are looking at a period of uninterrupted global stability that lasted nearly 250,000 years. Imagine a civilization that could plan in terms of millennia while we struggle to plan in decades. The psychological shock of this realization is exactly why mainstream academia refuses to engage with it. To accept the Sumerian king list is to accept that humanity is a latecomer to a world that was already ancient and highly organized long before the first pyramid was ever conceived. If a global empire ruled the earth for over 200,000 years, where is the physical evidence? Geologists often remind us that the earth's crust is a restless graveyard, constantly recycling itself through tectonic shifts and catastrophic erosion. Mainstream archaeology focuses almost exclusively on the Holocene, the last 10,000 years of relative climate stability. But the Sumerian king list demands that we dig deeper into the heart of the Pleistocene. This was an era of radical environmental change, dominated by ice ages and massive sea level fluctuations. The Forbidden Records state that 5 primary cities were established before the Great Flood: Eridu, Bad Tibera, Larak, Sippar, and Shurapak. These were not just mud brick villages. They were described as the hubs of a pre-human industrial complex. The texts mention the cleansing of the earth by a cataclysm that wiped the slate clean, burying these original cities under hundreds of feet of sediment and ocean water. This is why we find out of place artifacts, precision machined metal parts found in coal seams millions of years old, or megalithic foundations that dwarf the structures built on top of them by later cultures. The Anunnaki did not build for a human lifespan, they built for geological epochs. When we look at the colossal stone platforms of Baalbek or the subaquatic ruins of Yonaguni, we are likely looking at the skeletal remains of this antediluvian network. The silence of the archaeological record is not due to a lack of evidence, but a lack of perspective. We are looking for pottery and arrowheads when we should be looking for the scars of planetary engineering. The Sumerian texts are clear. The world before the dawn was a world of metal, light, and long-lived masters who saw the rise and fall of ice sheets as mere seasonal changes. The king list concludes its antediluvian section with a chillingly brief sentence: "Then the flood swept over." Before this reset, only 8 kings are recorded to have held the scepter of power. This small number of rulers over such a vast stretch of time suggests a social hierarchy of absolute stability. In the eyes of the Sumerian scribes, these 8 individuals were the old gods. They were the ones who brought the me from the stars, a word that can be translated as divine powers, but in the context of the texts, functions more like software or operating protocols for civilization. They didn't just rule, they programmed the human experience. They defined what it meant to be civilized. The Forbidden Records suggest that we did not discover agriculture, mathematics, or writing through a process of trial and error. Instead, we were uplifted or modified to serve a specific purpose within an existing empire. This realization shifts our entire identity as a species. We are not the pinnacle of an independent evolutionary journey. We are the survivors and perhaps the remnants of a much greater, much older hierarchy that operated on a planetary scale. The kings who ruled for 30,000 years weren't just characters in a story. They were the administrators of a world we can barely imagine, a world where the boundaries between biology, technology, and divinity were non-existent. As we move deeper into the records of Eridu and the origins of the Anunnaki, we must prepare to face the possibility that our current civilization is merely a shadow of the one that came before, a shadow that has been carefully managed to keep us from looking too far back into the darkness. We must now turn our attention to a specific point in the vast desert of southern Iraq, a place the Sumerians called Eridu. According to the Forbidden Chronicles, this was not merely the first city of Sumer, it was the first city on earth. When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu. This statement, etched into the clay thousands of years ago, suggests that the concept of urban civilization did not emerge from a gradual huddling together of tribes for protection. Instead, it was an imported structure, a pre-designed blueprint dropped into the cradle of Mesopotamia. Eridu was established as the home of the going Afar, the headquarters of Enki, the god of wisdom, water, and creation. But if we look past the mythological labels, what was Eridu? The texts describe it as a highly organized hub where the me, the divine decrees, were stored and managed. These me acted as the operating system for a new kind of world. Imagine a barren planet suddenly being introduced to the concepts of law, technology, agriculture, and high level architecture all at once. The Eridu Genesis suggests that the Anunnaki didn't just arrive, they colonized. They transformed a wild prehistoric landscape into a managed environment designed to sustain their long term presence. Modern excavations at Tel Abu Shahrain, the site of ancient Eridu, have revealed 18 levels of temples, each built precisely on top of the one before. The deeper archaeologists dig, the more they find that the earliest layers are often the most sophisticated. This inverse evolution is the smoking gun of the Anunnaki presence. Civilization didn't start simple and get complex. It started at a pinnacle and has been a long process of trying to remember what was lost. Eridu was the capital of a golden age that lasted for tens of thousands of years, a period when the boundary between the stars and the sand was non existent. At the heart of Eridu was the Abzu, a term usually translated as the deep water or abyss. In traditional mythology, this was the subterranean realm of Enki. However, when we analyze the technical descriptions in the Sumerian tablets, a different picture emerges. The Abzu is described as a place of immense power, a secluded laboratory where the destinies were decided and where life itself was manipulated. Enki, the lord of Eridu, is frequently depicted with streams of water flowing from his shoulders, filled with fish. But look closer at these ancient seals. The water often appears more like flowing energy or conduits, and the fish like rhythmic pulses. The forbidden records suggest that the Abzu was an advanced technological facility, perhaps located underground or underwater, where the Anunnaki maintained their life support systems and biological research. It was here that the decision was made to modify the local hominid population to create a Lulu, a primitive worker. The Eridu Genesis describes a world where the Anunnaki were struggling. They had been on Earth for thousands of years, mining the planet's resources and maintaining the irrigation of the Tigris and Euphrates. The work was grueling, and the lower ranking Anunnaki, the Igigi, were on the verge of rebellion. Enki's solution was radical: to bind upon the existing creatures of Earth the image of the gods. This wasn't a spiritual creation story, it was a genetic intervention. Eridu was the site of the first laboratory where two worlds, the celestial DNA of the Anunnaki and the terrestrial DNA of early Earth beings, were fused. This is why Eridu remained the most sacred site in Mesopotamia for millennia, even after political power shifted to other cities. It was the place where humanity as we know it was manufactured. As the ages passed in Eridu, the tension between the Anunnaki classes reached a breaking point. The forbidden records tell of a time, about 150,000 years into their reign, when the Igigi, the labor force of the gods, refused to continue their work. They burned their tools and surrounded the palace of Enlil, the chief administrator of the Earth mission. This rebellion is a crucial, yet often ignored part of our history. It forced the Anunnaki leadership to reconsider their entire operation on Earth. The decision to create a slave race was not born of divine love, but of industrial necessity. The texts describe a heated debate in the Council of the Gods. Enlil wanted to punish the rebels, but Enki, ever the strategist, proposed a third way: the creation of a surrogate worker. This transition marks the end of the first era of Eridu and the beginning of the human era. But this new creature was not meant to be an equal. We were designed to be keepers of the garden, to maintain the infrastructure that the Anunnaki had built over the previous 200,000 years. The records in Eridu detail the specific instructions given to these first humans: how to serve, how to build, and how to worship, which in the original language simply meant to work for. When we look at the ruins of Eridu today, we are looking at the remnants of the first corporate headquarters on Earth. The vast temples were not places of prayer, but administrative centers where the output of the human workers was collected and redistributed. The genesis of Eridu is the record of our species being drafted into a cosmic workforce, a history that has been carefully repackaged into the religions we follow today to ensure our continued compliance. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect of the Eridu records is the mention of the me. These were physical objects, often described as tablets or small devices that contained the essence of civilization. There was a me for kingship, a me for the art of the hero, a me for the craft of the smith, and even a me for the truth. These were not abstract concepts. They were items that could be carried, stolen, or lost. In one famous myth, the goddess Inanna travels to Eridu to trick Enki into giving her the me so she can bring them to her city, Uruk. This theft of fire story is common in many cultures, but in the Sumerian version, it reads like the transfer of high-level software or technological keys. The forbidden records suggest that without these me, human civilization could not function. They were the source code. If an Anunnaki lord withheld a specific me, that segment of society would collapse. This explains the sudden leaps in human progress that baffle archaeologists. We didn't slowly figure out how to smelt bronze or track the stars. The me for those skills was lowered or activated. Eridu was the central server for this knowledge. As we investigate the fall of this first city, we find that it wasn't destroyed by war, but simply abandoned when the me were moved elsewhere. The gods moved on, taking their technology with them, leaving behind a confused and dependent humanity to figure out how to use the manuals they had been left. To study Eridu is to study the source of our collective memory, a place where we were once servants to a power that viewed 30,000 years as a single shift of duty. The records are there, hidden in the clay, waiting for us to stop reading them as myths and start reading them as the technical logs of our makers. If the Sumerian king list and the foundations of Eridu provide the historical framework, the true mystery lies within our very cells. Modern science tells us that roughly 200,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans made a sudden, inexplicable leap in the fossil record. This is the missing link, a gap in evolution that mainstream biology struggles to explain with mere natural selection. But the forbidden records of the Anunnaki offer a chillingly precise alternative. They describe a process of binding the image of the gods onto a terrestrial being. This was not a spiritual metaphor, but a biological operation. In the texts, we find Enki and the mother goddess Ninhursag working in a house of Shimti, a place where the breath of life was managed. When we translate these archaic terms into modern scientific concepts, Shimti becomes Bit Shimti, meaning the house where the fate is determined, or more accurately, a laboratory for genetic engineering. The Sumerian tablets describe the mixing of a divine essence, a celestial DNA, with the clay of the earth, or the indigenous hominid DNA of the time. The goal was to create a hybrid, a creature intelligent enough to follow complex instructions and operate the technology of the gods, but subservient enough to never question its place in the hierarchy. This genetic enigma is written into our genome. We possess 223 genes that appear to have no evolutionary predecessors on Earth. They simply appeared, full formed, during this window of time. Could these be the traces of the Anunnaki's handiwork? The Sumerians didn't call us a natural species, they called us a crafted one. We are a biological bridge between the stars and the soil, designed with a specific purpose that we have long since forgotten. Beyond the physical body, the Anunnaki needed a way to program human behavior and society. This brings us back to the me, the enigmatic objects we discussed in Eridu. If our DNA is the hardware, the me were the software. In the Sumerian texts, the me are described as a set of rules, technologies, and social protocols that were given to humanity. There was a me for the priesthood, a me for metalworking, even a me for the ascension to heaven. These weren't just laws, they were instructions that allowed a primitive hybrid species to bypass thousands of years of trial and error development. This explains why civilization appears to emerge ready-made in Sumer. The me provided the mental templates for everything from architecture to music. But there is a darker side to this gift. By providing the blueprints, the Anunnaki ensured that human progress would always move in a direction that served their interests. We didn't invent the city. We were given the me for urban management so we could be more efficiently organized as a workforce. We didn't invent writing. We were given the me for accounting so the gods could track their resources. Our very culture is a curated reality, a set of protocols installed by masters who operated on a timeline of millennia. When we look at the sudden revolutions in human history, the agricultural revolution, the industrial revolution, and now the digital one, we must ask if we are truly innovating or if we are simply unlocking new me tablets that have been dormant in our collective subconscious, waiting for the right moment to be activated by our original programmers. The forbidden records suggest that the genetic intervention didn't stop with the creation of the first Lulu worker. Over the hundreds of thousands of years of their reign, the Anunnaki interbred with their creation. This is the origin of the heroes of old, the men of renown, mentioned in both Sumerian texts and the Genesis of the Bible. These hybrids, half Anunnaki, half human, became the priest kings of the ancient world. They possessed longer lifespans and greater intellectual capacity than the common worker, serving as the intermediaries between the gods and the masses. This bloodline of the gods is the foundation of the concept of divine right to rule. Even today, the obsession with genealogy and elite bloodlines in the corridors of power echoes this ancient stratification. The Sumerian king list is, in essence, a registry of these hybrids. When it says a king ruled for 1,200 years after the flood, it is referring to the lingering genetic legacy of the Anunnaki, a biological advantage that slowly diluted as the generations passed and the pure celestial DNA was washed away by terrestrial biology. This dilution is what we call aging and mortality as we know it today. The original records state that the first humans were meant to live much longer, but the operating system of our bodies was capped, perhaps to prevent us from ever becoming a threat to the gods themselves. We are a species with a locked potential, living in the shadow of ancestors who could watch empires rise and fall while barely aging a day. The genetic enigma isn't just a mystery of the past, it is a limitation of our present. Geneticists often point to junk DNA, the 98% of our genome that doesn't seem to code for any known protein, as a biological mystery. But in the context of the forbidden records, junk DNA takes on a revolutionary meaning. What if this isn't junk at all, but a vast encrypted library of the me? What if our original programmers left the blueprints for higher consciousness, advanced technology, and interstellar travel within our own biological code, locked away until a certain level of planetary vibration or technological frequency is reached? The Sumerian texts speak of a time when man will become as gods, a prophecy that suggests our genetic journey is not yet finished. The Anunnaki didn't just leave artifacts in the sand, they left them in our blood. As we begin to master CRISPR and genetic editing, we are essentially hacking into the original source code of the Anunnaki. We are picking the locks of the house of Shimti, but this path is fraught with danger. If we were designed to be a servant race, what happens when the servant gains the power of the master? The records of the me warn that knowledge without the proper destiny leads to the kind of cataclysm that once wiped the world clean. As we move into the next chapter of human history, we are finally coming face to face with our makers, not in the stars, but in the mirror. The genetic enigma is the ultimate puzzle, and the answer determines whether we remain a managed species or finally claim the kingship that was lowered from heaven all those millennia ago. We are the records. We are the forbidden truth. When we examine the remnants of Sumer, we are often blinded by the label of Bronze Age. We see clay, reeds, and mud bricks, and we assume their intellectual world was just as rudimentary. But the forbidden records suggest a terrifyingly different reality. The Sumerian texts describe devices and architectural feats that defy the technological curve of their era. At the center of this mystery are the me, the physical objects we've discussed, which acted as the technological source code for the Anunnaki mission on Earth. But beyond the me, the texts provide detailed descriptions of sky chambers and chariots of fire that navigated the mu, the firmament. We must ask, were these merely the imaginative metaphors of a primitive people, or were they the technical logs of an advanced spacefaring civilization? In the Epic of Gilgamesh and the myths of Etana, we find accounts of individuals being taken high above the earth, describing the planet as it looks from orbit, the oceans turning into small puddles, and the land like a baker's basket. This perspective was impossible for any human 6,000 years ago, let alone 200,000 years ago. The records suggest that the Anunnaki didn't just walk among us, they monitored the planet from a sophisticated network of orbital stations and atmospheric craft. The technology they possessed wasn't magic, it was an advanced mastery of frequency, vibration, and energy that we are only now beginning to rediscover through the lens of quantum physics. One of the most glaring pieces of evidence for lost technology is not found in the museums, but in the foundations of the world itself. The Sumerian records state that the Anunnaki were master builders who established a global grid of cult centers long before the flood. When we look at sites like Baalbek in Lebanon, with its 800-ton trilithon stones, or the precisely cut diorite blocks of Pumapunku, we see the fingerprints of a power that viewed stone not as a burden, but as a programmable material. The texts mention the use of sound and vibration to move mountains and shape the earth. Modern science has confirmed that acoustic levitation is a physical reality, but the Anunnaki had perfected it on a planetary scale. These megalithic sites often align perfectly with celestial bodies, serving as astronomical observatories that track the 25,920-year cycle of the precession of the equinoxes. To calculate such a cycle, a civilization would need to maintain records for thousands of years with mathematical perfection. The Anunnaki did not build these structures for worship. They built them as permanent, indestructible markers of a global navigation and energy system. They used lost technology to fuse stone at a molecular level, creating joints so tight that even today, a razor blade cannot fit between them. We are not looking at the work of slaves with copper chisels. We are looking at the remnants of a high-tech industrial empire that viewed the Earth's crust as its canvas. We return once more to the Abzu, the subterranean abyss of Enki. While often dismissed as a mythological underworld, the technical description suggests the Abzu was a sophisticated energy production facility. The texts describe glowing stones and shining minerals that powered the cities of the gods. Could the Anunnaki have mastered a form of cold fusion or zero-point energy? In the records of the Abzu temple in Eridu, the inner sanctum is described as a place where the light is constant and the sound of the deep is heard. This sounds less like a temple and more like a humming power plant. Furthermore, the Sumerian obsession with gold was not for its aesthetic value or as a currency. They claimed the gold was needed to shield the atmosphere of their home planet or to sustain their own longevity. This implies a technological application for precious metals that aligns with modern nanotechnology and monoatomic gold research. The lost technology of the Anunnaki was a science of the subtle, the ability to manipulate the atomic structure of matter to create energy, health, and power. They didn't need the polluting combustion engines of our era because they tapped into the very fabric of the planetary grid. The ruins we see today are merely the dead shells of a once vibrant, energized global machine. If this technology was so pervasive, why did it vanish? The Forbidden Records speak of a period of transition where the gods began to withdraw their physical presence, taking the me and their advanced devices with them. They left humanity with the manuals, the rituals, and priesthoods, but removed the batteries. This created a technical silence in the archaeological record. We find the intricate carvings of machines, the descriptions of celestial flight, and the impossible mathematics. But the hardware itself was either reclaimed or buried in secret vaults that have yet to be discovered. The Sumerians warned that this knowledge was forbidden for a reason. In the hands of a short lived aggressive species like humans, it would lead to planetary destruction. As we now enter our own technological singularity, we are essentially trying to reverse engineer the gifts of the Anunnaki without their guidance. We are finding the me tablets of the modern age in our silicon chips and nuclear reactors. The question remains, is our current progress a new discovery, or are we simply waking up a technology that was silenced 200,000 years ago? The records suggest that the Anunnaki are not gone. They are simply waiting for the cycle to complete, for the moment when their creation is advanced enough or dangerous enough to warrant their return. To understand the true scale of the Anunnaki presence, we must look beyond the fertile crescent of Sumer and examine a mystery that spans the entire globe, the existence of a pre-flood, high-tech network that left its fingerprints on every continent. When we analyze the Forbidden Records alongside the megalithic ruins of Egypt, the Andes, and the Indus Valley, we find a shocking mathematical and architectural consistency that suggests they were all designed by the same celestial blueprints mentioned in the Sumerian tablets. These records claim that before the Great Deluge, the earth was divided into 4 regions, or kingdoms, assigned to different Anunnaki lineages, yet they all operated under a unified system of energy and communication. This explains why we find identical polygonal masonry at the base of the Great Pyramid, in the walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, and in the ancient foundations of the temples in Japan. Stones weighing hundreds of tons, interlocking with such precision that they seem to have been softened or molded like clay. The Anunnaki were not just builders, they were global architects who established a planetary grid long before the rise of our recorded history. This network was not intended for human worship, but as a massive, functional industrial system designed to extract Earth's resources and stabilize its energetic field. The similarities in mythology across these regions are not a coincidence of human psychology. They are the fragmented memories of a singular global administration. When the Sumerian texts speak of Enki traveling to the Abzu to manage mining operations, we find echoes of this in the legends of South American tribes who speak of bearded Viracochas who arrived from the sea to teach them the arts of mining and engineering. This was a synchronized global endeavor. We are looking at a world that was once connected by a technology far superior to our current internet, a world where the gods could traverse the distance from Babylon to Tiahuanaco in hours, using the very sky chambers we analyzed in the previous chapter. The evidence of this network lies in the alignment of these sites with the stars and with each other, forming a complex geometric web across the Earth's surface that served as both a power plant and a celestial calendar. This was the Golden Age, a time when the world was one, managed by a species that viewed our planet as a strategic outpost in a much larger cosmic game. However, this global network also carried a darker purpose. It was the infrastructure for the management of the human slave worker population, ensuring that the genetic experiments conducted in the House of Shimti could be deployed and monitored on a global scale. As we peel back the layers of history, we find that the cradle of civilization was not just a small patch of land in Mesopotamia, but the entire earth itself, reshaped by a power that viewed our mountains and oceans as mere resources for their divine agenda. If the architecture was global, then the biological blueprint was as well. The Sumerian records state that the Anunnaki kingship was lowered from heaven to multiple locations, not just one. This explains why we see the sudden, simultaneous emergence of sophisticated civilizations across the planet, the out-of-nowhere phenomenon that puzzles mainstream archaeologists. In Egypt, we find the Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods Osiris and Thoth brought the arts of civilization. In the Americas, Quetzalcoatl and Kukulkan brought the same knowledge. When we examine the physical descriptions of these civilizers, they are identical to the Anunnaki: tall, fair-skinned, with piercing eyes, and a profound knowledge of the me, or the software of civilization. This suggests a coordinated worldwide deployment of the biological blueprint we discussed in Chapter 3. The genetic modification of Homo sapiens was not a local event. It was a global upgrade. We find that the mitochondrial DNA of modern humans points back to a singular, dramatic bottleneck and expansion that aligns with these records. But the most compelling evidence of this global network is the presence of forbidden knowledge in cultures that were supposedly isolated. How did the Dogon of Africa know about the invisible star Sirius B centuries before modern telescopes? How did the Maya calculate the orbits of Venus and the long count calendar with such precision? The answer lies in the Sumerian archives. They were all taught by the same masters, using the same celestial data. The Anunnaki established satellite cultures to act as guardians of specific pieces of the divine code. They were the watchers of the planetary grid. This global genetic signature is why we find common symbols: the serpent, the eagle, the pine cone, and the handbag of the gods, appearing in stone carvings from the jungles of Mexico to the caves of Mesopotamia. These are not archetypes, they are the brand logos of the Anunnaki mission. They represent the tools and the bloodlines that were used to domesticate and elevate the human species into a global labor force. The great work was the homogenization of the human mind under a single, theological technological control system that spanned the oceans. Why is this network not more visible today? The Sumerian records tell of a catastrophic event, the deluge, that wiped the slate of the earth clean. They claim that Enlil, frustrated by the noise and rebellion of humanity, allowed a tidal wave of celestial proportions to destroy the global network. This event, mirrored in over 500 cultures, was the reset button for the Anunnaki mission. The lost technology and the grand stone cities were buried under hundreds of feet of silt and water. Today, when we look at the strange anomalies on the ocean floor, like the Yonaguni Monument in Japan or the submerged ruins off the coast of Cuba, we are looking at the drowned remnants of this pre-flood global network. The Anunnaki records describe the evacuation of the gods into orbit during the flood, watching from their celestial boats as the global grid they had built was systematically dismantled by the elements. When the waters receded, the world was a different place. The high-tech infrastructure was gone, and the survivors were left with only myths and broken pieces of the me. The post-flood silence is the period where humanity began to rebuild using the rubble of the gods, creating the inferior mud brick versions of the grand megalithic originals. This is why our history books only begin 6,000 years ago, because that is when the Anunnaki returned to restart civilization in the ruins of Sumer, but on a much smaller, more controlled scale. They kept the high technology hidden in the Abzu and gave us the shovel and the plow. The global network was forced into the shadows, becoming the secret societies and mystery schools that would eventually lead to the hidden power structures of the modern world. We are living in the ruins of a global empire that was once so vast and so advanced that we can no longer even recognize it as technology. We call it mythology. But the stones remain, and as our own satellites begin to scan the Earth with ground-penetrating radar, the forbidden network is beginning to reappear, glowing under the sand and the sea, waiting for us to remember who we truly are. To understand why the truth of our origins is forbidden, we must first confront the reality of the Great Cataclysm, an event so profound that it shattered the physical and psychic connection between humanity and its creators. The Sumerian texts, specifically the Atrahasis and the Epic of Gilgamesh, describe the deluge not as a random act of nature, but as a calculated decision made within the Anunnaki High Command. While mainstream history treats the flood as a localized river swell or a mere fable, the forbidden records detail a celestial alignment of terrifying proportions. They describe the approach of a planetary body, often referred to as Nibiru, whose gravitational pull destabilized the Antarctic ice sheet, sliding it into the ocean and creating a displacement wave that engulfed the planet in a matter of days. This was the weapon of the gods, but the mystery lies in why they allowed it to happen. The records suggest a deep rift between Enlil, who viewed humanity as a failed, noisy experiment that needed to be silenced, and Enki, the genetic father of man, who sought to preserve his creation. The noise of humanity was likely not literal sound, but a metaphor for our burgeoning consciousness and our growing rebellion against the labor-intensive gold mines. The cataclysm was the ultimate system reset. It was during this period that the high technology of the pre-flood world, the global energy grid, the me hardware, and the levitation devices, was either destroyed by the water or deliberately retracted into the Abzu. The gods watched from their sky chambers in Earth's orbit as the cities they had built were erased by a wall of water miles high. This event created a collective trauma in the human psyche, a species amnesia that left us vulnerable and disconnected from our true history. When the waters finally receded, the Anunnaki faced a choice: to rebuild the high-tech paradise or to start over with a more manageable, primitive labor force. They chose the latter. The decision to hide the records of the pre-flood world was a strategic move to ensure that humanity would never again rise to challenge the authority of its masters. The technological silence we see in the archaeological record after the flood is not an accident. It is the result of a global, classified status imposed upon the true science of the gods. They replaced the me with religion and the technical manuals with rituals, ensuring that the knowledge of how to manipulate frequency and matter remained solely in the hands of a curated priesthood. This was the birth of the secret gate, the beginning of a world where the truth is hidden in plain sight, buried beneath the mud of the new Sumerian cities. The suppressions of the pre-flood records was a massive undertaking that involved the systematic destruction of physical evidence and the rewriting of the human narrative. The Sumerian tablets tell us that the kingship was lowered from heaven a second time after the flood, but this time the rules had changed. The Anunnaki established intermediate rulers, the demigods or hybrid kings, who served as a buffer between the gods and the workers. These kings were given the task of ensuring that the forbidden knowledge was kept in secret vaults. This explains the recurring legends of halls of records hidden beneath the paws of the Sphinx or within the foundations of the ziggurats. These are not just myths. They are the storage sites for the surviving me tablets and the crystalline technology that survived the deluge. The records were hidden because they contain the software of the universe, the keys to DNA modification, zero-point energy, and interstellar travel. If humanity were to regain access to these tools without the supervision of the creators, the Anunnaki feared we would become a threat to the cosmic order. This is why, throughout history, whenever a civilization began to rediscover these principles, it was met with a divine intervention or a sudden collapse. The burning of the Library of Alexandria and the systematic destruction of Mayan codices were not just acts of war. They were echoes of the original Anunnaki protocol to keep the human software from being upgraded. We were kept in a state of technical infancy, forced to rely on combustion and labor, while the true power of the planetary grid lay dormant beneath our feet. The silence of the gods is actually the silence of a warden watching a prisoner who has forgotten he is in a cell. The Sumerian records are the only unfiltered look we have at this era before the Great Erasure, which is why they were marginalized and labeled as mythology by the institutions that inherited the Anunnaki's control structures. To acknowledge the truth of these records is to acknowledge that our modern world is built on a foundation of suppressed science. Today, We live in the aftermath of this great cataclysm, a world where the fingerprints of the gods are everywhere, but the hands that made them are invisible. The suppression of the records has been so successful that the average person views the idea of an advanced ancient civilization as a fantasy. Yet the anomalies remain: the impossible stones of Baalbek, the forbidden DNA sequences in our genome, and the persistent noise of a species that is starting to wake up. The final reason for the hiding of the records was the waiting game. The Anunnaki knew that the cycle of the precession would eventually bring the Earth back into a high energy region of space, a time when the human consciousness would naturally begin to expand and the forbidden technology would begin to resurface through accidental discovery. We are in that window now. The resurgence of interest in the Sumerian tablets is the unsealing of the records that was predicted in the ancient texts. As we move closer to our own technological singularity, we are essentially hacking into the Anunnaki's abandoned network. The gods left us a world of breadcrumbs, hidden in the geometry of the pyramids and the frequencies of our DNA, waiting for a generation that was brave enough to look past the official version of history. The Great Cataclysm was the end of the first mission, but it was the beginning of the hidden agenda, a long-term experiment in human sovereignty and control. The records were hidden not because they were false, but because they were too true. They tell us that we are not the pinnacle of evolution, but the product of a sophisticated engineering project, and that the lost technology of the past is actually our stolen inheritance. The question is no longer if the cataclysm happened, but what will happen when the technology that was silenced 200,000 years ago is finally turned back on. The silence is ending, and the voice of the Anunnaki is echoing through the clay of Sumer once more, warning us that the keepers of the gate are still watching, waiting to see if we will use the me to build a new heaven or to trigger the final reset. To understand the final agenda of the Anunnaki, we must first shift our perspective from human time to cosmic time. What we perceive as thousands of years of human history is but a few shars, or orbital cycles, to the beings described in the Sumerian king list. The records indicate that the Anunnaki did not leave Earth because their mission was finished. They retreated into the shadows to allow the biological seed they planted to mature in a controlled environment. This is the ultimate secret of the final agenda. Earth was never just a gold mine, it was a nursery for a new kind of consciousness, a hybrid species designed to inherit the stewardship of this sector of the galaxy. The return, mentioned in nearly every ancient prophecy, is not a physical arrival from the stars, but a synchronization of our upgraded DNA with a specific celestial frequency that the Anunnaki pulse from the edges of our solar system. The tablets speak of a time when the heavens would open and the kingship would be restored. This refers to the completion of the precession of the equinoxes, a 26,000-year cycle that the Anunnaki encoded into the dimensions of the Great Pyramid and the layout of Angkor Wat. We are currently approaching the 0 point of this cycle. The final agenda involves the harvest of consciousness, where the genetic tags placed within the human genome 200,000 years ago are activated by the increasing cosmic radiation entering our atmosphere. This is the true meaning of the apocalypse, not a destruction, but an unveiling of the hidden code. The Anunnaki's departure was a strategic withdrawal to see if their creation could survive the technical silence and rediscover the me through trial and error. Our modern advancement in artificial intelligence, CRISPR gene editing, and quantum computing are not original human inventions. They are the inevitable unfolding of the Anunnaki software that was locked in our junk DNA. The gods are not coming back to save us. They are coming back to inspect their property and see if the slave worker has finally evolved into a partner guardian. The evidence of this imminent return is found in the sudden activation of ancient sites across the globe, monoliths that are beginning to hum with low frequency vibrations and gravitational anomalies that modern science cannot explain. The final agenda is the integration of humanity into a larger cosmic hierarchy, but it comes with a price: the total loss of the illusion of human independence. We are realizing that our history was a scripted prologue, and the return of the masters signifies the beginning of the second act, where the gods and men will once again walk the same path, but under a new, unified galactic law. The genetic modification that occurred in the House of Shimti was never a static event. It was a self-evolving program designed to reach its peak in our current era. The Anunnaki's final agenda centers on the retrieval of the refined genetic data that billions of human lives have generated over the millennia. Each human life has acted as a biological processor, testing the limits of emotion, creativity, and survival within the physical realm. The return is essentially a data harvest. The Sumerian tablets hint at the Book of Life, which is a metaphorical description of the global genomic database that the Anunnaki monitor from their orbital platforms. When they speak of the gods weighing the hearts of men, they are describing a technical assessment of the vibrational quality of our DNA. The agenda requires a specific percentage of the population to reach a resonant frequency that allows for the stable integration of high-dimensional technology. This is why we see a global push toward transhumanism and the merging of biology with silicon. It is a subconscious human drive to prepare our vessels for the return of the Anunnaki consciousness. The gods cannot exist in our dense atmosphere without technological or biological assistance, and the human body was designed as the ultimate host for their high-frequency essence. The return will not be a landing on the White House lawn. It will be a simultaneous activation of the God gene across the planet. Those who are tuned to the frequency will experience a radical expansion of perception, while those who are not will perceive the event as a chaotic collapse of reality. This is the separation of the wheat from the chaff, described in later religious texts, which are simply distorted echoes of the original Anunnaki technical manual for the final transition. The agenda is cold, calculated, and purely biological. We were never children of the gods in a sentimental sense. We were a strategic investment in the future of their species, a way for them to bypass their own evolutionary dead ends, by filtering their essence through the vibrant, chaotic medium of human life. The return is the moment the investment is collected. As the technical silence ends, humanity faces the reality of the new covenant. This is not a religious contract, but a new set of operating parameters for the earth. The Anunnaki's return marks the end of our quarantine and the reintegration of Earth into the Abzu network of the wider galaxy. The hidden records, the ones suppressed after the flood, are being released into the human collective consciousness now because we have finally built the infrastructure, the internet and the global neural net, to handle the data. The final agenda involves the disclosure of the true nature of the gods, not as supernatural beings, but as a class 2 or 3 civilization that operates on laws of physics we are only beginning to glimpse. The return will bring the reappearance of the shining ones, but they will be seen through the lens of science rather than myth. The ziggurats will be reactivated as power hubs, and the celestial boats will be recognized as the sophisticated interstellar craft they always were. However, this return also brings the final judgment, a technical audit of how we have managed the planet's resources and our own genetic potential. The Anunnaki provided the blueprints, but we have spent the last 6,000 years building a world of conflict and waste. The agenda includes a restoration phase, where the old systems of control, the debt-based economies, and the fossil fuel energy models will be replaced by the original Anunnaki zero-point systems. This will be presented as a gift, but it will come with a total loss of privacy and autonomy, as every human mind will be linked to the divine network of the returning lords. We are standing at the threshold of the world before dawn once again, but this time the sun that is rising is not our own. It is the light of a cosmic empire returning to reclaim its most successful experiment. The silence is over. The frequencies are rising. The me are being reloaded. The Anunnaki have never truly left. They have simply been waiting for us to finish building the gate through which they will walk back into our reality. The final chapter of human history is being written in the same cuneiform code that began it, and the end is simply a return to the beginning. We have traveled from the dark mines of the Abzu to the heights of the modern skyscrapers, tracing a lineage that was never truly ours alone. The story of the Anunnaki is not a story of the past. It is a blueprint of the future. As we stand at the precipice of a new era, we must confront the final truth of our existence. Humanity was never meant to be the master of this planet, but a bridge between the terrestrial and the divine. The return to the stars is not a physical journey we take in metal rockets, but a return to the frequency of our makers. The cycles of civilization, the rise and fall of Sumer, Egypt, and the modern West, were not random fluctuations of human progress, but carefully timed shars designed to refine our collective consciousness. We are now at the end of the great year, the final 26,000-year cycle, and the silence of the gods is officially over. The ancient records hidden in the forbidden vaults of history were not kept from us out of cruelty, but out of necessity, waiting for the moment when we could look at a cuneiform tablet and see not just myth, but advanced physics. The final agenda of the Anunnaki is the reintegration of Earth into the galactic fold, but this reintegration requires us to shed the illusion of our own independence. We have spent millennia fighting over gods that were actually flesh and blood scientists, and over religions that were actually mistranslated technical manuals. To return to the stars, we must first accept that we are a hybrid species, a biological experiment that has finally reached its maturity. The cycle of civilization is a spiral, leading us back to the same point of origin, but with a higher perspective. We are the Anunnaki's legacy, their living memory, and their greatest achievement. As the winged discs reappear in our skies, they are not coming to conquer, they are coming to reclaim. The choices we made in the technical silence, the way we treated each other and the planet, have been the ultimate test of our design. Now, the gates of the Abzu are opening once more, and the ancient path to the stars lies before us, lit by the same golden light that illuminated the first temples of Eridu. We are no longer the black-headed ones of the Sumerian plains. We are the waking children of a cosmic empire, ready to take our place in a hierarchy that spans the stars. The world before dawn is fading, and the sun of the Anunnaki is rising for the final time. Our history is complete, our genome is unlocked, and the return to our celestial home has begun. The gods have returned, and in their eyes, we finally see our own true reflection. The cycle is closed. The dawn has arrived.